Good morning, everyone. Oh, trying to fix my mic here a little bit. Got a little bit out of place. Well, good morning. Welcome to Revolution. Hope you all are doing well today. There we go. Maybe. There we go. Let's keep slipping, man. My mic keeps slipping into the future. I think it's just too heavy. Or maybe I need to, I don't know. No, I think I figured it out. Hold on, guys. Hold on, ladies and gentlemen. We'll just put it there for now. Look real professional with the microphone. So good morning, everyone. Hope you're having a lovely Sunday here at the wherever you are here at the Revolution Gathering. Let me know. Make sure everything sounds good. How you doing? Good morning, all. So glad to have you here. Is there too much headroom, you think? Do you think I should pull this down? I mean, I won't do it today because I have to move everything, but maybe I should pull it down a little bit. I just want you guys to see the magic shelf. The magic shelf. Looks like, have you guys seen our friend here? Bum, 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 ba, dun, 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 dun. Hello, I'm Pee-wee. Hello. So those listening online, I'm just showing my daughter's Pee-wee Herman doll that I like to put here when she's not playing with them. And then look, also I got this. Godzilla. Girlfriend got that for me. Anyway, Pee-wee, you're at church. You have to sit up. Anyhow, there's some little signs out to Pee-wee's Playhouse all around here, so maybe you can find those. Have little nods to that because Pee-wee Herman, his show was really influenced me as a child. Probably why I'm so weird and freaky. And I felt like, he was often there when my parents were busy. So grateful for the legacy of Pee-wee. Anyway, welcome to Revolution Gathering Sunday morning. So yesterday was the big No Kings March. And I know not all of you are with me on the same political spectrum. I'm a little left of the left. So I'm not always happy with, a lot of you got mad at me because I wasn't happy with the Democratic Party when they were in power. It's funny how that switches, and now I'm not really happy with these guys, and now all the conservatives are mad at me. It's just everybody takes turns. But I went to the No Kings. It was such a diverse group of folks because you have people really, you have lifelong Democrats, you have leftists, you have all people from all different, probably people who are in the middle who just think things need to change, want to see our immigrant brothers and sisters treated better, or don't feel like the military should be in the streets. But the No Kings March was quite amazing. It's one of the realities of life is, and John Hume has taught me this, and a lot of life has taught me this, is that we are very diverse people. People have difference of opinions, and that's okay. Also the fact is we often, I had someone yesterday, right? Like they saw me put out that I was at the No Kings thing, and they wrote, I disagree with just almost everything that Jay Baker believes, but I love that guy, and I'm going like, in the reality of that, we probably agree on way much more than we disagree on. We might, there might be some theology and some politics that we don't see eye to eye on. But I'm sure, we probably like similar foods, maybe music. We both think we should take care of kids and help our kids. There's so much we have in common, but it's so wild how we allow, I get people are what's important here. That should be the common denominator, is that we just want the best for others. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. But it's just so wild to me that one, as you think about our faith, if you subscribe to Christianity, the whole point is loving others. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But also like that and politics keep us so divided. And it's usually like 3 or 4 issues. It seems like we could find peace if we all just agreed to stop listening to the noise and, you know, just started letting our politicians know, like, you know, do a better job and, you know, spend less time scapegoating the other group and, you know, just try to do better. Make sure that, you know, there's some things that, you know, we don't want to see. We don't want to see people treated. We'd like to have, you know, affordable health care, and we'd like to be able to have livable wages and those things. I mean, let's let's talk about that for everybody. But unfortunately, that's not what's happening. So we protest. We practice our First Amendment rights because that's something that we should not take for granted. And because, you know, we love America, you know, saying like, oh, these people hate America. I wouldn't like if I see conservatives out protesting, I'm not like, oh, they hate America. They must hate America. You know, I'm like, I think it's just, it's crazy. I mean, I guess the one thing that, some of these folks saying it was the Hate America Festival did was like, I saw so many, or Hate America March, I saw so many more American flags. So I guess those politicians were able to do the same thing like September 11th did, and, you know, boost the sale of American flags, and everybody was like, okay, well, you know, we love America, and they're helping with patriotism. You know, question people's patriotism, and it helps come out. So, wow, look, that's what they have in common there. Anyhow, that was my joke for the day. I'll work on it. I won't open with it next time. But it was lovely. I went with my friend Teresa and her husband, and they're kind of my Rage Against the Machine friends. And we go out and we've done a couple protests together, and we had a great time. And you know what was really cool about it is that after like walking 2.5 miles, we went and had pizza, and the conversations that we had about like people and humanity and politics and our issues with our own politics and the struggles we had there, you know, there were just some really great things that happened, you know, and I think it's great for people not to feel alone. I think we get so focused on everything that's going on politically in this world, and get online and you can kind of start to feel lonely and just crazy. And then you go, oh, you know, hey, I'm touching human beings, relating. There's other people who feel the way I do, you know. So there is something to be said about that type of community where at least it helps you, you know, go like, oh, okay, you know, I'm not alone. We're not crazy, you know. We're just in a place that we find ourselves in right now. Is there a story? Someone asked me, is there a story behind the new necklaces? Um, my daughter made this one, and we went to the bead store together. I made this one, and this one is a copy of the Jim Morrison one, but in different colors. It's in yellow, blue, and black, which is, I believe, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember. It's an English band. It's not Primal Scream. It's the guys with the lemon, you know, the guys who use the lemon. Somebody will tell me. So that's the stories. For those who are listening, I'm talking about I have 2 beaded necklaces on, and me and my kids went to the bead store, and that was kind of one of our things a few months ago, is that we just made beads. I had this bead necklace that broke, and I was like, hey, I need to do this. You guys want to make beaded necklaces? And we did. And so I made this one, and Minnie made this one, and I think Milo took his with him. So there you go. Those are the story of my beaded necklaces. There you go. So it's nice to get away from social media and be with other human beings. And I'll tell you what, Pacific Northwestern people are so crazy and so weird, because there were so many people in like those blow up costumes. I mean, I have a picture because at one point I was marching behind an eagle and a chicken. And then there was a blow up hot dog, like wiener dog. And then I was next to a real dog. So yeah, it was, in some ways it's almost like it reminds me of the Irish, you know, like they really, like they're angry and upset, but they're not taking it well too seriously. I mean, the Irish, I guess one time did take it too seriously, but but they ended the troubles, thank God, because of the peace process. But no, but you know, that kind of like taking the piss, like, you know, we're angry, but we can also have a laugh about it. And there was something healing about that as well. Unfortunately, a lot of my other Christian brothers and sisters on Facebook did not seem to feel the same way about it, and were very angry and had a lot of very angry things to say to me. And it gets a little exhausting after a while. So I had to block like 10 people this week because I got to do this. I got to be your pastor or your friend and your top speaker. I got to be a dad. I got to go do my after school work. I got to do life. I got to study. So I can't spend all my time arguing. It's getting to the point where that could be a full-time job, and trust me, it does not pay well. Anyway, I even saw a guy dressed as Jesus. So I saw Jesus at the thing, and I was talking to my friends when I saw the person as Jesus. I'm like, should I talk to Jesus? Because he doesn't really pay fair wages. I work for that guy. Can I talk to him about fair wages? So there you go. I'm in a good mood today, I guess. Which is nice. Should I make bead necklaces and sell these for like donations? For your donation, you can get the Grace. It's going to drive me crazy, you guys, if I can't remember the name of this band right now, and it is making me nuts. And I know I have one of their albums just around here somewhere, and I don't know why it's driving me crazy. They got the Lemon. They use the Lemon as their thing. 90s Brit pop band. Come on, folks. Yeah, I'll anoint them. Anointed beaded necklaces. Maybe I will, but you have to get like, little special needle that you can thread that's like 2 parts, and then you put the beads on. And anyway, this is not my tutorial on beading, but if we do it, maybe I'll do a live one where you can see me making them. So I'm not just ordering them and being like handmade from the cross of Christ, wooded beads from the cross of Christ. Remember when that guy from Fantasy Island was being like, this is a real sliver of the cross of Christ? I was like, man, I got to get one of those. All right, so let's talk about love today. And I think I thought I had my phone. Well, anyway, I saw a church sign and I posted it. You probably seen me post it on Instagram if you follow me on the old social medias or on Facebook. And it was from this just a church sign, and it said, are they here illegally is the new who is my neighbor. Like this is are they here illegally is the new, then the question basically becomes like, who is my neighbor? And that's what we're going to talk about. Who is my neighbor? I thought I had my phone, because if I had my phone, I would just pull it up, but I'm just all over the place, you guys. I am all over the place. I'm checking. That's my chain wallet clicking against the chair. Anyhow. All right. Well, you get the point. And I loved it. I thought that's great. That makes complete sense. That kind of puts it in, really puts it into the context of what I'm trying to say, and why I show up at something like the No Kings March is how we treat each other. And so, yeah, there you go. Like I said, like I would love to not talk about politics, but when it starts to really affect human lives and people's lives in such negative ways, I think it's important that we speak up, and it's important that we talk about it. Not the lemon trees, no. They had a lemon as a thing. Just, stone roses. The stone roses, that's what it is. The stone roses. So these were stone roses colors from one of their album covers that I really liked. And so I just used those colors for this beaded necklace. Boom. Thank you. I want to be adored. So let's look at that. I'm going to start with Mark 12. We are going to get back into context, everybody. But when I'm busy, it's really tough to take those deep dives in. And that's what I really do. When we're going to talk about context, I want to like really get deep down into it and talk about it. And I think it's great. And I think it's important, but I think this is just as important, or maybe even more important than talking about the context, is loving others and how we love others. And what does that look like? And who is that? So in Mark, Hopefully my jacket's not too noisy. You know, leather jackets are noisy. That's why I don't ever wear this when I do talks. But I figured since I didn't have a lapel pin in, I could get away with it. It's like there's a Saturday Night Live thing skit where there's it's a leather store and everybody's walking in and they're all like crickly, crickly, crick. It's pretty funny. Oh, why I'm looking for Mark. Don't forget to like and subscribe. That really does help us a lot. You can turn on the notifications if you're a wild human being and you go, well, Jay, I don't subscribe to YouTube, but if you want to help Revolution, maybe subscribe to YouTube and become one of our followers. That would really help. And there's also lots of great videos on like how to repair shoes. I watch some of those. I watch these videos on 1960s rally races. Oh, so cool. So there's lots of good, fun stuff on YouTube. How to like restore an action figure. I mean, people make all sorts of videos. How to charge a electric car battery, which one time I had to do, and I was so freaked out. And then I just put on a YouTube video and I realized you can actually start a electric car battery with a non-electric car. It's crazy, I know. Where are we going to, guys, folks? Mark 12. 30. You know, also, my friend Mark Maron's WTF podcast went off the air. He did his last episode. It's kind of sad about that. I really enjoy his I've always enjoyed that podcast. Usually it's like the first 10 minutes are my favorite, where he's just being really real with people and, you know, just kind of, you can feel the empathy there. It's really kind of a beautiful moment that I will miss Mark Maron. And I was lucky enough to be on WTF, gosh, years and years ago, and get interviewed by Mark. And that was one of the highlights of my career. Mark 12:30. I'll jump up to 29. Jesus answered, the first it's here. Oh, let's even go a little bit further. Let's go to 28. Let's go to Mark 12:28. One of the scribes, who is a religious teacher and an expert of the religious law, scribes came near and heard them disputing with one another, and seeking that he answered them well, he asked him, which commandment is the first of all? And Jesus answered, the first is, hear, O Israel, the Lord of God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. Okay, folks, pay attention to that mind. That's why we talk about scholarship. That's why we talk about biblical history. That's why we talk about the customs that were happening at the time. It's okay to use your brain when talking about Christianity. You don't have to get rid of your brain, and you don't have to get rid of common sense, and you don't have to get rid of those things. You can use critical thinking. It's okay. That you should be using critical thinking when it comes to, especially this collection of books. Love your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandments greater than these. And then there's another translation, another time where he says, equally as important as loving God is loving your neighbor as yourself. I've always thought one of the ways we love God is when we love others. So he says, these are the two most important commandments. Love God with all your heart. And then he goes, and equally as important. And I mean, he's pretty much saying that because he goes second, because God didn't ask what's the top two. He said, what's the first thing? And then Jesus, and loving others. Now, here in Luke, it might be a play off of the same story. I don't know. I did try to do a little deep dive on this, but honestly, some of my really good, some of my favorite commentaries on this didn't have a whole lot to say. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Over here in Luke, I am your father. Luke's got some great stuff about how we judge. It really does. If you have some free time, you know, read through like Luke 6. It's pretty hot stuff. helps us learn to argue well, but that's not today's talk. Today we are in Luke 10. Luke 10:25. This sounds very similar to the story we just had. Um, and I will say this, guys. Just saw a comment that said, someone said, we left a church that said don't question anything, and I think that's vitally important. You know, and I'll tell you, some of the times, and I've had this with both progressive Christians and conservative Christians, as the same is often their attitudes and our attitudes. I'm going to conclude myself in this. Our attitudes, 'cause I can be pretty mean sometimes and pretty edgy sometimes as well. Um, can people see us and they get us confused with Jesus or with the church or something, and these people can really drive us away. I just go like, God, no wonder people, I wouldn't want to go to the church where I'm constantly being questioned or told this, or I put up a no kings thing and people are like, but Jesus is king. What about the King of Kings? And I just don't think religiously like that. I don't think like somebody who goes to church every Sunday, like in a normal church, and I don't have that Christian talk, that language as much as I did when I was a kid. So sometimes I just roll my eyes at things, and sometimes I even use the roll eye emoji. Oh. But it's because I just want people to be a little bit more human. Like I don't like it when your religious belief system becomes so strange and so weird that it's becomes almost worthless to other human beings. You know what I mean? It just becomes like, I just say weird stuff, oh, what about, and just everything is like a religious own, like I'm going to own you with this. And you just go like, oh, this is exhausting. So here in Luke 10:25, it says, just then a lawyer, which is pretty much a scribe, expert of the Moses law, same thing. So just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. And, we can kind of tell by this question. I mean, here's a guy who's expert of the law of Moses. Another, so that's why they're constantly going up to Jesus, testing him, because these guys knew what they were talking about. Um, but I think also testing people often sometimes also instigates hostility. So we have to be like, are we testing people or are we actually trying to have a conversation with them? Um, and this more feels like that he was wanting to test to see if Jesus had the right answer. And I feel like that's what we do with each other. Like somehow some like right answer or wrong answer to a theological question is somehow going to like take away our salvation or do something like, I don't know, like it's somehow like some ultimate judgment or own. I mean, we use these things and it's just in ways that are just so arrogant and rude. And it's just strange that we've grown up in a system, a church, groups of people and loud theologies and denominations that become such hostile places on both sides. We've become so hostile towards one another, and we don't know how to have a conversation, or we don't know how to have, we don't know how to be wrong, or we don't know how to just disagree. It's just wild. Like it to me that it just feels like sometimes it feels like you're taking crazy pills, especially when you spend time in philosophy and trying to understand things like that. And you not spend so much time in churches and you spend time around normal people and just people in general. Cause I'm Christians, I'm not, and you start to go like, yeah, you can't talk like that in society and expect people to really understand. They're not going to be drawn. People aren't going to be drawn to being tested constantly. That's not, you know, that people might be drawn to having good, vigorous conversations. But if we lose our temper or get mad, when I can't have when someone gets mad anytime I bring a certain subject up, I can't really, I know that that's just an area that often I can't go with them, or that I have to sit down and go like, hey, why do you get so angry about this every time we talk about it? You actually have to talk about talking about it. But just then, a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he said, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And which is an interesting question coming from a teacher, a Jewish teacher. He said to him, what it is written in the law? What do you read there? And he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind and with your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live." And this is another interesting thing about like these questions Jesus gets. This guy goes like, "What must I have?" You know, when the rich young ruler goes, "What must I have to have eternal life?" And Jesus says, "This." And he goes, "Okay, but what else can I do?" And then he goes, "Give everything you have to the poor." And he goes away really sad. And everybody's like, "See, you have to give away." I'm like, but the problem with that is that Jesus answers the first question and says, "You're good." And the guy goes, "I still don't feel good enough. What else can I do to be perfect? What can I do to be perfect?" And then he goes, "Give everything you have to the poor," which I think pretty cool, crazy thing, but it's also a very scary thing to do. And the guy goes away really sad because the guy goes, "I can't be perfect." You know, reminds me of that quote from East of Eden we've talked about before. You know, now that you realize you don't have to be perfect, you can be good. I don't think he got it. Hopefully, eventually he got it. But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" And so when I saw this church sign that said, "Who is my," "are they here legally?" is the new "who is my," "who is my neighbor?" And I believe this Grace Methodist Church nailed it. I think they really nailed it in a really great, I think it was one of those really good church signs that really nailed it. And this makes people really uncomfortable. Um, and it's interesting to me because it's almost like you're like, do I follow like what my government's telling me is the law and they telling me that it's right, or do I follow what Jesus has called me to do? And somehow they figure out so a lot of people figure out how to compromise it. And I can't do that, and so I go, "Well, I can't do that." And they go, "Well, don't you know that Obama, he deported all," and I was like, "Yeah, I didn't like when Obama was doing the way he did it either. But I especially don't like the way this guy's doing with what we see with ICE and military and US streets. I just don't think that that's compassionate or humane." Yeah, so they always, and I'm like going like, this isn't about parties. This is about people. And it's very hard for people to understand that because we think it's all about like, so people like, like if you hear about the Epstein files, I'm like, "Yeah, well, what about uh, Bill Clinton?" I'm like, "I don't care if Bill Clinton's in there or not." You know what I mean? It's like the whole idea is that we've become we've got this way of in the United States where we look at our political parties as like our favorite football team or baseball team or soccer team or whatever. And they just can do no wrong, And so we all think it's just about like our allegiance to a party or allegiance to a politician. And, it should always be about the people, not the politicians, not the party. Um, it's not a binary way of thinking. It's not this like red or blue thinking like, "Oh, well, when they did it, it was good, and he did it in a better way." No, Obama and them had cages and things like that, and families got separated. It wasn't a pretty thing either, but it's getting a lot worse. It's getting worse and worse and worse. But I will say, yes, our liberal folks laid some ground for this, what's happening today. So you have to just kind of go like, okay, that's part of it. But for us, it's about fighting for rights of those who are the least of these. It's for fighting for rights for people who have human breath. It's for treating people with respect, love, and dignity. And we want to see that happen in our country. And I don't think that's too much to ask, especially as followers of Christ. We go, "Hey, we'd like to kind of see this, but we'd like to see it for everybody, not just Christians or just Americans or just the chosen people." That's always drives me crazy. Anyway, enough about that. But he wanted to justify himself, and he asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" So this is definitely hostile. Like he gets a little hostile, it seems like. And what Jesus is about to do is redefine the terms of neighbor for people with the story of the Samaritan. We can go ahead and read through it, I guess, and look at some things here. But what's really important, though, is more of this question of who is my neighbor? And you can have many layers to this story, of who is my neighbor, well, the immigrant is my neighbor. But because the immigrant is your neighbor, it doesn't make your conservative friends and family less neighbors. You know what I mean? You're just saying like, "Hey, you've got these rights, they don't. We're fighting for that." So they're still our neighbors. We're still called to love them. This story makes that very clear. Um, but it doesn't give us the pass to be like, well, we can just say, well, these people are all criminals or they're bad or they're doing this. When we become more concerned about our own well-being or the well-being of our own tribe, and we create a community that it's ousting others and has this common enemy that's not really Christianity. That's not following Jesus. That's not this is not the message that Jesus was giving, and it's not the message that the Apostle Paul was giving, and I will argue it's not the message that even that James was giving. And so we have to make really tough decisions when it comes to this stuff. And I think we have to sometimes, people talk about dying to your flesh. Well, I think for a lot of people, flesh is so caught up in politics. And that becomes their idols because they're like, this is the only way to change things. So we have to think about that critically. And how do we navigate that? And, not to mention all the stuff that's going on in our unconscious and everything that we're projecting onto that. And, ways we were raised to believe certain things. We have to examine where our motives are coming from, why our belief system is this way. Why do we feel that we need to always be right? Is there a part of us that recognizes that maybe we're wrong in something, and that the constant need to defend something, may it be because we are insecure about it. Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to a place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. So you've got two people who you would think were fellow Jews, had something to do with this guy, would stop by, would have helped, but they couldn't. Maybe this is a setup for me to get robbed, or maybe this will make me ceremonially unclean to do my thing. What will happen to me if I stop here? And so they pass by. And another interesting thing that I often see is when I've had conversations with certain people about what's happening with Israel and Gaza and things like that, is the binary think there, that somehow either Israeli life is more important than a Palestinian life, or that a Palestinian life is more important than an Israeli life. And that's both are precious. Neither one is more important or less important than the other. And it's always strange to me, but when the argument comes in of, what about this and this happened? And you're going like, yeah, but what about, this is a bad situation. This isn't just a black and white, clear situation. People are losing lives. People are dying. Children are suffering on both sides. Like we want to see this end. And I'm grateful that Donald Trump is helping this end. I hope that we can somehow reach peace in the Middle East. I'm not optimistic about it, but the point is that it's just always so strange to me when I see folks constantly going like, well, that side lives aren't worth as much as this, and this injustice is so much, and so we have this kind of thing going here. That's really strange to me. Now here you have something very different happening. I mean, you have people who see each other as the same in so many ways, but they're not going to stop. But then he says, but a Samaritan, while traveling, comes near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. Dr. King gives a talk about the Samaritan, and I really love it, because Dr. King says, the other passerbys ask, what will happen to me if I stop? And he goes, when the Samaritan passed this wounded person who was considered, a foreigner to him, someone different, someone that he shouldn't be concerned with, an enemy, and even in some ways, he thought to himself, what will happen to this man if I don't stop? He didn't think about himself. He thought about the person who was in hurt and in pain, and he was moved with pity. You could even say empathy and compassion. All those things came to play, and he goes, this guy is going to die if I don't do something. So he was moved with pity. He was compelled. He went to him, bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. And then he put him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. Spent the whole day taking care of him, because this is the next day. So guys taking care of him, making sure he's, The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave him to the innkeeper and said, take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay whatever more you spend. Which of these 3 do you think was the neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He said. It's like, which one of these things do you think was the friend of the man who fell into the hands of ICE? He goes, the one who showed him mercy. Jesus, that was what, he didn't say. And often people look at this and go, there's a reason that the religious teacher didn't say Samaritan, because they didn't even like to say Samaritans, much think about Samaritans, talk about Samaritans. But the one who showed him mercy. Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. So Jesus here, what he does is he redefines neighbor in terms of how one acts towards the others in need. He's saying when we help each other, we are the neighbor. When we are the prodigal, when we are the, get all my titles mixed up. When we are the Samaritan, we are going to be moved with compassion. We're going to see other people suffering, and we're not just going to think about what's going to happen to me or what's going to happen to my tribe, or we're going to think what's going to happen to that person. And that's always been something that my parents really put in my life growing up and raising. And sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's a real pain in the ass, to be honest with you. I have what I feel is what people call empathy. I don't know what an empath is. I don't know all that stuff. I'm a person who does have empathy. And cares about people, and when sees people suffering, I'm worried about them and what's going to happen to them. And I think, oh, what if I was in that position? And what if that was one of my children? Or, and I think about that. So when I see what's happening overseas, or when I see what's happening to my immigrant brothers and sisters and some of our own people who live here, some Americans have been taken up by ICE, I think over 170 as well. When I see that happening, when I see the military in the streets, I think, how would that affect my life? What's that going to do to them? How are they going to keep their family together? What is that going to do to their mental psyche? And I want to be able to be a service and show mercy. And that's really hard in this world, because now you get arrested and you got enemy of the state and all that kind of stuff. So that's why we're out there walking on the No Kings rally. It's not just about that. It's not just about the president. It's about the things that are happening to the people. It's the consequences. So when I go, who is my neighbor? And you ask, who is my neighbor? Jesus very well could have told a story of an immigrant and ICE. Your neighbor is people in need, people who are suffering, people who are hurt. That's your neighbor as well. And it goes even further in another part of the Bible where Jesus talks about in the Beatitudes, you love your enemies, do good to those who persecute you. And it's quite wild to me that so many people who claim to be these giant Christians, usually the ones who will be like, oh, I serve the King of Kings, the great Yahweh, or whatever. They'll say really religious stuff, and they'll be like, and I had some guys like, I rolled my eyes, and the guy's like, you don't believe Jesus is the king? And I'm like, well, I believe Jesus is the king as much as I believe Jesus is the prime minister, or the Jesus is the quarterback. It's like, these are just words, it's context. I'm not familiar with kings all that much. But the people in biblical times understood why Jesus was called a king, because they were familiar with how that system worked, or with a Caesar or things like that. But I think who is my neighbor is the question of our time. And when I see people who seem very blinded to this and not wanting to see it, it really confuses me. But I also am moved with compassion towards those people, thinking like, if I'm looking at them thinking that they're completely out of touch and completely crazy, and like I can't see how they can't see it, are they looking at me in the same way, going like, "How? What is wrong with this guy? How does he think this way? Why? How does he think that these people? They're probably looking at me the same way." And that's a good place to start of going like, "Okay, we both think each other are something's wrong." Something is wrong, but it might not, let's figure out what it is rather than being like, what am I missing and what are you missing? And I think that's something that social media has done really well, is to keep us divided, has made us just completely out of touch with each other. And politics, I think, aim to do the same thing, uh, to keep us divided. I mean, I was just so shocked that I saw politicians being like, protesting is un-American. I'm like, really? That's where you're going to go? Um, And I believe that this is the question of our time. I also believe this was a very similar word to what James was saying when he said faith without works is dead. Remember, we talked about that in the context talk I did a few weeks ago. And he's saying, if you pass someone who's hungry and in need and in cold, and you go, stay warm, eat well, take care of yourself, bye-bye, faith without works is dead. Like if you see the man in the pit beat up by the robbers and you go, good luck, hope another one of your people come by. Can't don't I ever think about this every time I see somebody with a flat tire and I just pass by. I'm like, oh, I'm not the good whatever, the good punk rocker. But I believe this is exactly what James is saying to us as well. And I believe this is what Paul was saying to us in like verses like Corinthians 13, especially 4-7. He's like, you could do, or even before, you could move mountains, but without love, you're nothing. I mean, this is the statement of the gospel. And why I look at context is usually because when you look at context and you tear a lot of this stuff down, a lot of the stuff that we use to kind of excuse ourselves from loving the other or asking who the other is or serving, someone argued with me, like, well, you think Jesus would have to be dependent on Rome to help people? I'm like, do you know, like Rome was the occupying government, right? They were occupiers, it's a completely different situation. And so it shows when people don't know their context or their Bible, and when they're trying to argue with it, like, oh, Jesus didn't ask Rome for help. I'm like, that Rome was really hostile towards Jews, right? Like, I mean, they weren't too hostile because they wanted to rule over them and they wanted to have people to rule, but they were hostile towards them because it was, they were living in occupied territory, Jews were. So, you gotta, and see that. You got to understand that to have that conversation, so I explained it to the person and they didn't get back to me, which is sometimes a real blessing. But I believe that's what James is saying. I believe that what Paul is saying when he goes, love never gives up, never loses faith, endures every circumstance. You have to endure quite a circumstance to stop on your trip to take care of somebody and to heal them and to spend the night with them, taking care of them. And then, hey, here's some money, and any money that's needed, I'm there. I mean, who is my neighbor? That is the question of the moment. And we're really failing at it. And we're allowing politicians and political systems to come in and be asterisks and to give us an excuse to not love our neighbor as ourselves, to not love the stranger, to not love the enemy, to not follow. And like I always say, it's progress, not perfection, folks. None of us are perfect at this. But the fact is, so many of us are blind to it. And I think this is one of the things we have to continuously remind folks, is who is my neighbor? And I always tell people, like, listen, if you just care more about like the law and politics and things like that than the message of Christ, I understand that. But then of course they think, oh, you can't, they have to justify it. They can't just say, oh, that's what I'm doing. Because honestly, in the long run, that's your prerogative. I don't care. I'm not saying you're bad. I'm just saying don't come here using Jesus to justify it, because that just doesn't, from scholarship and context, that just doesn't work at all. Just from simple plain reading that we just did, that doesn't work. And I'm going to tell you another reason why this is so important, and why we're playing around with legacy here. And I think this is important. But like I said, I believe that this is what James was saying. I believe this is what Paul said, like in Corinthians 13. He also says it in Galatians and different places like that. I mean, he's trying to bring divided people together. And I really believe that the Christian faith has lost its way. We've lost our way. And like I said before, like this is one reason I ask people to help support this work, is because we got to get this message out there. We got to say, this is not the way to do it. There's another way. There is good news, and it's called good news for a reason. That's why I want to get out there. That's why I want to go places and talk and meet with people in person and do those things. But, I can't do that if I'm working 5 different jobs just to try to keep food on the kids' table and my own table as well. I got to eat too. And I think it's hard for the capitalist person to grasp like why that kind of way of living. But for me, it's like, I think that's why people misunderstood my parents in some ways, but that's another story for another day. Now, why is this important? Jesus is teaching. Now, I've talked about this before, and it's very important that we see this. Jesus was often seen as a moral teacher. And honestly, a lot of the morality that Jesus was teaching, other moral teachers taught it, Greek teachers, Greek philosophers, they talked about this stuff. A lot of things that Jesus was saying wasn't brand new stuff. It wasn't a giant revelation, but there was a big revelation. And believe it or not, it wasn't that he was Messiah or that he rose from all that. That wasn't the big revelation in his teaching, and the morality or the moral teachings of Christ. The impact and the legacy of Jesus's moral teaching is really only one of the things that we just talked about, is the teaching of loving others and the foreigner and the enemies, is what separated him from other moral teachers of his time. Usually people didn't say, love other people outside of your own tribe, worry about the people 1,000 miles away who were affected by the volcano or things like that. That just wasn't moral teaching. It was survival of the fittest. People were only living into their 40s at most. Marriage was a completely different concept. Life was a different concept. There was a hierarchy of gender and all sorts of different things, where you stood in your, that's why Jesus said there's neither male nor female, Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free. So Jesus's teaching of loving the other, and then when, Paul adds that with like saying there's no hierarchy here, or, is what separated him from other moral teachers of the time. This is Christ's legacy. Christ's legacy is loving the other, loving those who are different than you, loving those who you think are none of your business to love, loving those who are even annoying you and persecuting you. That was the legacy, and that is the legacy of the teachings of Christ. You could obviously say that that is the legacy of Christianity. That's what sticks out to all the philosophers and the theologians and the people like that, this is the big thing that changed things. So when we see concerts of being like, money to save, like let's save Rwanda, and things like that. And you see or Live Aid and concerts like that, you're literally seeing the legacy of the teachings of Christ. When you see people loving others and going out, and we've took it and been like, well, we're just going to go across the nations and spread Jesus. But loving people in other places is really a legacy teaching of Jesus. And I've read this through secular scholarship, as well. So this is something really important for us to remember. So when we ask, who is my neighbor? And we realize it's everybody, that's legacy. That's Jesus' legacy. And my question is who will treat it as so? Who will carry on the legacy of Christ? Do we care about that legacy? I think it's important to look and see, I think there's a lot of great teachers and deconstructors who are trying to figure out, like, how did we lose that legacy? But I'm asking, how do we get back to that legacy? And we have to talk about it. All of you listening now, we got to think about this. So these are the questions we should be asking ourselves, and the things that should come up in conversation. And that's why I think studying is so vital and important. Is that you go, oh wow, And I looked into, I heard it, and I was, oh, this is really, because I heard somebody say some flippant things about Jesus's moral teaching, and it kind of drove me crazy. And I thought, oh, that's not very nice. And so I was like, Jesus is so special because Jesus is Jesus, And so I looked up and I was like, oh wow, Jesus, a lot of that moral teaching wasn't new. But the one thing that was really new, and the one really thing that stuck out, was the love for the others, the love for the strangers, the love for the least of these. And it's amazing to see people try to qualify who fits into the least of these and doesn't fit into the least of these. Like, oh, well, they're not abiding by the law of the United States of America, so they're no longer considered the least of these. Criminals aren't the least of these. And I'm like, if you think them as enemies, guess what? Now they've just jumped into that category of the other. So who do I love when I love my neighbor? You love them. We don't realize that when we're arguing with people and we get so angry and sometimes even feel hate towards that person, that we are literally arguing with the other. And so it puts a different perspective on carrying the legacy of Christianity and following Christianity and wanting to see it. I guess the question is, I get all, oh, do you believe Jesus died on the cross? Do you believe Jesus is the King of Kings and all that stuff? And I just want to well, do you just believe in loving the other? Like, ask me that. Who is my neighbor? Though, if you're looking for a qualifier, I don't really believe in the qualifiers there too much. I really want people to accept they're accepted. And I feel like we really have to learn to accept ourselves often before we're able to love the others as ourselves. But the fact is that should be more of a qualifier. Well, who do you say who's your neighbor then? Next time somebody, well, so those folks aren't your neighbor? Yeah, but they're we will do whatever, just like grace. We want to, I say grace is anarchy, because we always want to put an asterisk on who deserves grace or who gets grace or who doesn't. And then there's nothing about deserve in grace at all. Doesn't really matter. Grace moves outside of our own laws and regulations and discriminations. And so we have to get that. And I would say who is my neighbor is also anarchy. It's going to wreck our system. It's going to say, yeah, you can still, and then, the O in the anarchy stands for order, right? So you have this kind of thing of going like, okay, well, I got to love the other. And then with order, it's progress, not perfection, like I've said before, but we got to figure that out. So who is my neighbor is also an anarchist question of saying, like, are you going to let your politicians tell you that? Are you going to let your tribe tell you that? Are you going to let the music you listen to tell you that? Are you going to let your customs and where you come from tell you who that is? Are you going to let, the color of your skin or your identity markers tell you who that is? But, who is my neighbor? And I think the answer to that is people. And I hope we can see that. And I hope we will, if we're really interested in following this guy, Jesus, that's the part of the legacy of the moral teachings that Christ brought to the table that we'll continue to move forward with. So that's the talk for today, folks. The legacy, the Jesus teaching, the legacy of Jesus. Who is my neighbor? Thanks, everybody, for tuning in today. Thanks for asking about my necklaces. We got that all figured out. Hope my squeaky leather jacket wasn't too much for you. I know Caleb made me take my jacket off usually when we did talks, but I figure now with the microphone, it won't be as squeaky. We'll find out. I'll ask Brian Yarborough, who I will be with next weekend, and I'm very excited about. He's coming here. Maybe we'll do a little Brian and Jay show for you. That would be exciting. Love you guys. Stay encouraged. I was encouraged yesterday just by being with all those folks and having such a great conversation with my friends over pizza afterwards, was great. This message encourages me. I'm grateful that Grace Methodist Church put up a sign that was so cutting and hit me so deeply. So thank you for that. Listen, if you like what we do, we really do need your support. I mean, I've been getting paychecks from Revolution that have been so small. I've almost gone into a panic attack, but luckily I've got my after school job again, which is lovely. And I really do enjoy it, but we really do need your support. You can go to revolutionchurch.com. We have YouTube, we have PayPal and Venmo, and you can make a donation through that, and it's tax deductible. You might say, well, I don't have Venmo or I don't have PayPal. Well, if you want to do us a favor, sign up for YouTube, like and subscribe. That helps us. And then sign up to PayPal or Venmo and make a tax deductible donation. And you can find us there through revolutionchurch.com. We can't do this work without you. And I want to do this work more and more. And no gift is too small, and don't think, oh, somebody else is going to give, because somebody else isn't going to give. And no gift is too big either. Just make that clear. But this is the message. This is what you're supporting, is this type of work and what you see here. And what we'll get for that is hopefully more of that. And taking this to, I want to take this to a bigger stage. I wish I would have been thinking more about this when I was speaking at all those evangelical Christian festivals back in, the late 90s and early 2000s, because I think this is the question of our time. Who is my neighbor? And caring about others because they have life. And that's, a message of nonviolence. But yeah, we could really use your support. Also, ways you can support. If you could, Jay, I don't have any money. Well, we'd rather have you than your money. So you can also share this stuff with people. Let people know we're here. Share this. Post stuff on Instagram about what we're doing. Post stuff on your Facebook. Reach Change. You can even go in and say an encouraging word every now and then. That helps. Touch in on, send me a DM on Instagram. My Facebook DMs are always a mess, but Instagram, I usually try to get to the best I can. Love you guys. Thank you all so much. And yeah, who is your neighbor? Guess what? I'm your neighbor too. So peace out. Love you guys. See you next week. And hopefully we'll be sitting here with none other than Brian Yarbrough. Bye-bye.